Now that we fully know everything about Carolina's conference schedule and we can look at projected ACC standings, we can get an idea of just how hard it's going to be. And I got to say, Carolina's schedule is really difficult, especially as compared to a certain other school down the road. Let's unpack it.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Friday, September 29th, 2023. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and I want to thank you for joining us to get your team every day. If you'd love to be an even bigger part of this show, great news. We have a brand new Discord, which is an opportunity for the Locked On Tar Heels community to join together to have conversation all the time. People are diving in and joining, and we're having a blast having great conversation. The link to join is just in the show notes, whether you're watching or listening. Come on in. It's going to be a party. Coming up on today's show, we're going to share some insights from UNC's preview capsule in the Blue Ribbon preview and the Almanac preview for the upcoming basketball season. Also, we're going to take stock of where ACC football is at right now and Carolina's place in that. But first, I want to take more of a look at Carolina's ACC schedule in terms of basketball. One of the struggles that we have in a big conference like the ACC is that you have an unbalanced schedule, meaning that you don't play a true round robin home and home where you play every team both at the Smith Center and at their place. And so you don't get a great idea of who truly is the best team in the conference throughout the course of the regular season. So really, you're kind of at the mercy of the schedule in a given year, and you're also at the mercy of your opponents being good or bad, like, oh, shoot, Virginia Tech's down this year or whatever it is, right? And so you just get that. Now, throughout this week, we've looked some at Carolina's ACC schedule since it rolled out in terms of logistics and makeup, but we haven't looked at what it means for who Carolina will and won't play and where they will and won't play. Let me explain. Recently, we've been able to get our eyes on the Blue Ribbon Yearbook for this year. That's the college basketball primer, as well as the Almanac primer for the year as well. And so both of those obviously have ACC projected standings in them that aren't going to be perfect, but they do give us a good overview and idea of the ACC projections. And then that's going to help us take a look at Carolina's schedule. So let me unpack it this way. The Almanac, here's where they predict the rankings of the ACC this year. Duke 1, Miami 2, Carolina 3, Virginia 4, Clemson 5, Syracuse 6, Virginia Tech 7, NC State 8, Boston College 9, Wake Forest 10, Florida State 11, Georgia Tech 12, Pitt 13, Notre Dame 14, and Louisville 15. Now, so that it's a bigger sample size, here's how Blue Ribbon has it as well. Duke at the top again, North Carolina 2nd, Miami 3rd, so they're flipped. Clemson 4, Virginia 5, Pitt 6, NC State 7, Wake Forest 8, Virginia Tech 9, FSU 10, Syracuse 11, Boston College 12, Notre Dame 13, Louisville 14, and Georgia Tech 15 here. And so when you start to take shape of that, along with what we know Carolina's schedule to be, you get a better idea of how hard or difficult it's going to be. So in terms of teams Carolina plays both on the road and at home, it's obviously Duke and NC State. You get them every year. And then Clemson, Florida State, Miami, and Syracuse. And that is 12 of your 20 ACC games, because that's 6 teams that you play both on the road and at home. Duke's first in both. NC State is 7th and 8th. Clemson is 4th and 5th. Miami is 3rd and 2nd. So that's 8 of your 20 games are against, Duke, Clemson, Miami, who are all projected to be top 5 teams in the conference. That's tough. And NC State, who's projected to be 7th or 8th. Now, thankfully, Florida State's projected to be 10th and 11th at those 2 different spots. And Syracuse 11th and 6th. So you get a little bit of a reprieve there, but none of those are projected to be 12, 13, 14, or 15 in conference. And so you don't get the luxury of 2 games against any of those schools. That's difficult. Now, road-only games, is Boston College, who was picked 12th and 9th in those two projections, Georgia Tech 15th and 12th, Pittsburgh 6th and 13th, and Virginia 5th and 4th. So a little bit easier there. And then the home only games is where Carolina kind of has the easiest schedule. But again, this is only 4 teams that Carolina plays just at home. Louisville, Notre Dame, who are both right at the bottom, Virginia Tech right in the middle, 9th and 7th, they're projected, and Wake Forest 8th and 10th. So to give some more context to that, here's what I did. I took the home and road teams, I took the home only teams and the road only teams. I added up all those projected order of finish numbers and then took the average of it to get an idea of how difficult Carolina's schedule is projected to be with all 3 groups of that. So basically, the lower the number, the harder your schedule, because that would be meaning they're projected to finish higher in the ACC rankings. The lower the higher the number, I guess I should say, being closer to 15 means an easier schedule. So here are those 3 averages. Home only teams averages 11.25 predicted order of finish. That means those home games only should be a little bit easier. But again, that's only 4 of them. The away games only averaged out to 9.5 projected seed finish. All right, kind of middle ground. But the home and away, those 12 games averaged out to an average order seed finish in the ACC of 5.75, meaning those games are going to be really difficult. And so that home and home schedule just stinks. And again, that's 60% of your conference schedule. And when you compare that to where Duke's is at, they get to play 2 games against Georgia Tech, 2 games against Louisville, 2 games against Notre Dame, 2 games against Pitt, and then the other 2 games obviously against Carolina and State. But that means that their average predicted seed finish of their home and away games is 10.2, almost double what Carolina's was at 5.75, meaning Duke's schedule for the teams that they get to play twice is almost double as easy as Carolina's. Now, obviously that's on paper and it's projected, but still Louisville, Georgia Tech, Notre Dame, they're just not going to be good. And Duke gets to play them 6 total times. That's tough for Carolina. And so what that means is, a lot of times people just look at a schedule or your record. It's like, it can't just be wins and losses. You have to be able to look at metrics to get a better idea of how good or bad a team is. So Carolina's got a really tough road ahead of them, particularly compared to Duke when you look at the top of the conference. So that's really, really tough. And the Tar Heels are going to have to be ready for that. And again, that's the frustration of an unbalanced schedule, is you just get tossed that sometimes. So we'll see what happens. But if this Carolina team can be as good as we hope, they can maybe go out and do that. So we'll see. Now, we also have some schedule stuff that in response to looking at the schedule, we've got the Discord that I talked about, got some observations back from a couple people in there, and wanted to share some of those insights because I thought they were really interesting and helpful as well, in addition to the things that Coach Pack and I talked about on Wednesday's show. The first of which comes from Connor H. Connor H says this: while I don't like having FSU in the middle of a very tough non-conference stretch, I think having that game at home is a huge relief as compared to last season's rough stretch where we finished playing at Virginia Tech rather than at home. So true, Connor. Let me unpack that a little more for folks who might not remember. Last year, in this same type stretch, Carolina went to Portland for the Phil Knight Invitational, didn't even come back to Chapel Hill, went straight to Bloomington, Indiana to play IU in the ACC Big Ten, and then got to come home, but then had to go to Virginia Tech to Blacksburg to play there. So Carolina went on a really, really tough stretch. That's when they lost 4 in a row: Iowa State, Alabama, Indiana, and Virginia Tech. This year, that stretch looks completely different. But it's like the same type of thing. You got your multi-team event, then you got your conference challenge event, and then that first ACC game. But it's battle for Atlantis, which is a lot closer than Portland, obviously, and then back-to-back home games instead of back-to-back road games. Now, they're tough games. Obviously, you're hosting Tennessee. That's going to be a really tough game, but it's in Chapel Hill. And then you're playing Florida State, which I know they're not projected to be as good, kind of similar to last year, but it's still an ACC game. But again, also at home. So instead of Portland, Bloomington, Blacksburg, now it's Atlantis, Chapel Hill, Chapel Hill. That projects to be a lot better. So great point there from Connor. Connor also says, since we don't have any true road games in the non-conference portion of the schedule, I'm personally very interested in the games at Pitt and Clemson, which are the two games that start the main chunk of the ACC schedule. Winning both of those would be a huge statement maker. Of course, beating NC State would be huge too, which is the game right after those two. I just chose Pitt and Clemson since they are our first two true road games. Great points from Connor there. Like, that again, that Carolina schedule is tough, especially having to go 3 straight road games to start the main chunk of the ACC schedule. But if you could knock off both Pitt and Clemson, boy, that would be huge, especially when you look at that means you got several of those road games behind you. So, Connor, thank you so much for those points. And then the other thing coming from the Discord came from UNC Minded. And UNC Minded says this, quote, playing FSU during that stretch normally would not be fun. That stretch we talked about earlier. And I know they are not likely to have another season like last season, but hopefully Coach Ham doesn't have them killing it just yet, and it will be more of an easy game. That's a great point. Remember last year with Florida State, they did start to come on a little bit more later in the season, but at the beginning of this season particularly was when they struggled. And hopefully that'll be the same this year too. So great point there from UNC Minded, who also says, quote, also don't mind the 3 home games in a row before the finale with Duke. Completely agree with that. At the back end of Carolina's schedule, in the same way that they have to basically start ACC with those 3 road games, they get to end ACC play with 3 home games, which one of those is the last of which before Duke is on Tuesday. And then you get all those days leading up to Saturday at Duke. So a nice closing stretch to the ACC schedule. Well, great stuff there. Just wanted to dive in the schedule a little more and just kind of compare Carolina's and Duke's and see kind of how it seems like Carolina's is going to project to be a lot more difficult. But you got to go win it on the court. So Carolina can do that. Now, what is Carolina learning from last year's kind of letdowns that will help them for this year? I want to share a few thoughts on that. Plus, a couple of Tar Heels have made Blue Ribbon and the Almanac's All-ACC preseason teams. I'll share all that with you in just a second. But first, I need to tell you that this episode of Locked on Tar Heels is brought to you by Nutrafol. Did you know that 80% of men are going to experience thinning in their lifetime on their hair? It's normal, but doesn't have to be your fate. You can get ahead of thinning with Nutrafol. Go to Nutrafol.com/men to take their hair health wellness quiz. You can identify causes of your thinning hair, and then Nutrafol will give you a personalized plan for better hair health through whole body wellness. Nutrafol supports whole healthy hair growth from within by targeting root causes of thinning, such as stress, hormones, environment, and more. So take the first step to visibly thicker, healthier hair. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com/men and enter promo code LOCKEDONCollege. Find out why 4,000 healthcare professionals recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com/men, spelled Nutrafol.com/men, and enter promo code LOCKEDONCollege. Once again, Nutrafol.com/men, promo code LOCKEDONCollege. Don't forget to check out Locked On College Football Kickoff Live today, Friday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on every YouTube channel live. Make sure you check that out. Get ready for this weekend's games. Okay, we've been talking about this Blue Ribbon Yearbook primer and the Almanac primer as well ahead of this season. I wanted to share 2 specific quotes from the Blue Ribbon primer that I thought were really interesting about Carolina's season and some thoughts that I had on it. The first one is trying to put last year's experiences into a little bit of context. And here's what Blue Ribbon had to say on that. Quote, it's not as if the Tar Heels were terrible, meaning last year. They still finished with 20 victories and had a winning record in the ACC. Here's the thing. They just fell so far below their preseason expectations, fueled by team members making championship or bust proclamations, that it's tough to consider the season anything less than a disappointment. I really, really appreciate this context from Blue Ribbon because I think we got so wrapped up in what happened last year that it was tough to keep it in proper context of where things were. Because you go back to Coach Davis's first season.
I'm not sure I understand.
my phone my watch just responded to me. That's hilarious. Remember, Carolina wasn't awesome for the first 2/3 of that first season before they had the run that they made. And then last year, it wasn't awesome either. But a lot of it for us is because of the heightened expectations that we had coming into the year. I think if we looked at it on balance and realized, hey, Carolina had 20 victories, they had a winning record in the ACC, it just wasn't what it was intended or hoped to be. I think this assessment is so level-headed and on point. I was captive to those preseason expectations as well. I didn't think Carolina would be preseason number 1, but when they were, I got caught up in it. I got swept up in it, but I probably shouldn't have been. Now, should Carolina have been better than they were? 100%. They absolutely should have been. They should have been able to finish games better. They should have been able to win more games, more close games. They just didn't. But it wasn't as bad as I think we make it out to be. And that's something to keep in context. All that said, it's got to be better this year. And another quote from Blue Ribbon's yearbook helps us start to think towards that. It says, quote, "The first step toward accomplishing that goal," meaning the goal of making this year better, "was taken last March, shortly after the Tar Heels found themselves on the outside looking in at the NCAA tournament bracket. It began with a series of meetings Coach Davis described as, quote, great, long, straightforward, and direct conversations with his returning players, particularly stars Armando Bacot and RJ Davis. Among the main topics of those conversations were chemistry and playing for the name on the front of the jersey rather than the back, issues that both plagued the Tar Heels from the jump, despite having virtually everyone back from the Final Four run," end quote. This is another great point. 3 things I want to take away from this: how Carolina can learn from last year and move towards a better season this year. Number 1, it's great insights into what we all saw, but no one from the inside was really willing to admit what he said, what it says here in the primer about issues that plagued Carolina from the jump, meaning team chemistry and playing for the name on the front of the jersey rather than the back. We all saw it. We all sniffed it out. But no one was ever really willing to say it. And I think we have to be able to call those things out to say, it's clear that this team does not function well together as a team. It's clear we've talked about the assist numbers and how porous they were. We've talked about the lack of movement. We've talked about not enough touches for Armando Bacot. And I firmly and fully believe that this year's team is going to be better at that. They see what went wrong last year, and they're going to move in a better direction. And I believe that chemistry is already there. I believe playing for the jersey, the name on the front rather than the name on the back, which is such a cliche in sports, but it's so true, is already in place. And from everything I've seen, from everything I've heard from other insiders, I think Carolina is in a much better place this year. So that's my first takeaway from that. Great insight. Why would no one call it out? Number 2, this shows to me Coach Davis's willingness to have difficult conversations. I think one of the things that came up a lot last year was, why is nobody keeping Caleb accountable and calling him out? Why is no one forcing Caleb to look for better shots? Why is no one forcing the team to have better ball movement? Why is no one forcing the ball to go inside to Bacot more? Not that he's going to put it up every time, but just so that there's better in and out movement. This shows to me that Coach Davis is willing to have those conversations. Was he having them all the time last year? We don't know. But at the very least, people weren't always enacting the things he was saying. Coach Davis's willingness to have these great, long, straightforward, and direct conversations with the players after the season shows me that he is willing to do what needs to be done to keep his team accountable. And so I think that is a great thing. And again, he continues to say, I'm learning on the job too. So maybe he wasn't having as many conversations last year, but at least going forward, I see his willingness to do so. And then the third takeaway for me from this about this year's team is that Armando and RJ don't have to be everything for this team and shouldn't be. But turning the tide from last year in a healthier direction has to start with them. I love that that capsule talks about, particularly that those conversations from Coach Davis were happening with Mondo and RJ. Because again, while it doesn't have to be all them, it has to start with them. They are the staples, the returners, because they do have to be leaders. While, it seems like Cormac is going to be more of a vocal leader voice along with Paxton Wojcik and Harrison Ingram, Mondo and RJ, as the stalwarts of this program, have to be the guys to set the tone. They have to be the tone setters, and they need to start speaking up more. And again, so the key word for me is accountability. They, as a team, have to be willing to keep each other accountable. If we want to get to places we didn't get to last year, we got to be willing to call each other out. And that never happened last year. Remember, 2 years ago, Brady Manek was doing a lot of that. Who is the guy that's going to be willing to do that and hold his teammates accountable? And all of this begs the question, how will Coach Davis use the depth around Mondo and RJ to put stuff in a better place, to keep stuff going in a better way, to make this happen, to allow everyone to function as a better unit, willing to play for the name on the front of the jersey? So we will see what happens with that. Anyway, one other thing I want to point out from Blue Ribbon and from the Almanac is just quickly their all-conference teams. Armando Bacot makes the first team for both of those, along with some other players, obviously Kyle Filipowski from Duke, Blake Hinson from Pitt, and Tyrese Proctor from Duke. Those guys, all four of them are on the first team for both of those publications. Blue Ribbon also has Nigel Pack on their first team. The Almanac, instead of Pack, has Reese Beekman of Virginia. On the second team, Blue Ribbon doesn't have a second team, but the Almanac does, and RJ made that one. And so it's great to see both of those guys on there. The rest of the second team on the Almanac is Judah Mintz from Syracuse, PJ Hall from Clemson, Quentin Post from Boston College, and Norchad O'Meara from Miami. I don't have quibbles with any of that. I think all of those guys are deserving. Now, of course, in a massive league like the ACC, it's so difficult to have good representation of everyone, but that makes a ton of sense to me. We are several weeks into the college football season now, 4 to be exact, and the ACC is looking really good. More importantly, Carolina is right in that mix at the top of the ACC. What's it look like now, and what are we looking for going forward? I want to unpack that for you in just a second. But first, this episode of Locked On Tar Heels is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebay.com/motors. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, ACC football so far. We're 4 weeks in. Most teams have either played 1 or 2 games. Obviously for Carolina, just 1 ACC game, beating Pitt on the road last week. Key, critical way to start off the season. And I just thought with Carolina not playing this weekend, it was a great moment to look at the state of things currently in the ACC. First off, I feel like the Tar Heels are in a really good place. Are there things to clean up? Certainly. Is everything perfect? No. But right now, you have a week off to work on all those things. And by the way, thankfully, you have a week off to work on those things that aren't perfect, but you're 4-0. Because here's the thing, in terms of a record, you can't get any more perfect than 4-0. Like, I know the details might be different. The details might differ, but the scoreboard is the great decider. And on the scoreboard, a W is a W, whether you win by 1 or 5,000. And Carolina has nothing but put up W's. So as long as you keep stacking those wins, you're in great shape. And this is a 1 week at a time scenario. Sure, you're going to stick your head up above that sometimes to come up for air and look at the big picture. But right now, the Tar Heels just need to worry about the Tar Heels and taking care of business 1 week at a time. And when you do that, everything else is going to take care of itself as well. So since there is this week off right now and a chance to breathe, let's come up for air and look at that bigger picture. In terms of ACC championship odds, depending on which site you look at right now, and these are updated odds for this week, Carolina is right in the mix in the top 4. Every odds maker I've looked at has Florida State number 1 and Miami number 2. But then right in the mix at 3 or 4, depending on where you look at it, is Carolina. The only other team that's in that mix in the top 4, interestingly enough, is Duke. How about that? The Blue Devils rising up. Obviously, they get that massive game with Notre Dame this weekend. But looking back at the preseason odds, FSU was already number 1. Carolina was already number 3. But the biggest moves is that preseason, Clemson was picked number 2 and obviously has fallen. They're down in like the 6-7 range now when you looked at updated odds. The biggest movers up are Miami and Duke. Miami was 6. They've jumped to 2 in projected ACC championship hopes. Duke was 8, and now they're up to 3 or 4 in projected ACC championship hopes. Now, those projections aren't just making the game. They're actually winning the championship. So in terms of making the ACC championship, Carolina's odds are really good. But again, you got to keep stacking wins 1 week at a time. Well, looking at the big picture of the ACC, you might have heard this week, but the conference has 6 undefeated teams. And of course, wildly enough, one of them is not Clemson. I don't think we could have fathomed saying that as recently as 2 or 3 years ago. Those 6 teams, obviously Carolina. The others are Florida State, Syracuse, Duke, Miami, Louisville. Obviously, 2 of those are Carolina's next 2 opponents, Syracuse and Miami. So you got a lot ahead. Also of note, North Carolina, Duke are undefeated. Also, Kansas is undefeated. Clearly, they're all 3 football schools now and not basketball schools. Actually, Kentucky's undefeated too, I believe, right? So clearly, the basketball royalty is turning over a new leaf. It's all football schools. I'm just kidding. Anyway, looking at ACC teams that are ranked, there are 4 of them currently in the AP poll, 5 if you include Notre Dame. Florida State ranked 5th in the AP, 4th in the coaches poll. Notre Dame is 11th and 13th. Carolina is 15 at both. Duke is 17 and 16. Miami's 18th at both. And then Louisville, Syracuse, Clemson are all receiving votes. And so doing really good there, the ACC is in terms of having a bunch of teams ranked or close to being ranked. Now, as you look at this weekend, there's a bevy of really important games. There are 6 different games. No, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, 7 games involved. No, 6. I counted wrong. Sorry. 6 games involving ACC teams this weekend. Louisville at NC State. Louisville's favored in that game by 3.5, but that's clearly a spot where Louisville's undefeated season could drop off. But if Louisville wins, NC State's sitting 3-2. I don't think any of us are going to be any sort of upset about that. Kind of a throwaway game. Bowling Green is at Georgia Tech, whatever. But another important ACC game, Clemson is at Syracuse, favored 6.5. It's another spot where an undefeated ACC school could go down. But if Syracuse beat Clemson, 3 losses for the Tigers. Yikes. You got Virginia at Boston College. Things are icky there. Pitt at Virginia Tech, another game. Both those schools are 1-3. But then obviously the most massive game in the ACC this week, number 11 Notre Dame at number 17 Duke. Notre Dame's favored by 6. And obviously that's another spot where an undefeated ACC team could go down. So we got 6 undefeated ACC teams right now. Could be down to just 3 after this weekend. We'll wait to see. So some great ACC football action. Thankfully, the Tar Heels kind of just get to sit, wait, and watch and continue to work and grow at getting better. Before we get out of here, I want to give you a whip around Carolina action going on this weekend. No football, obviously, but there are several teams you can cheer for. Men's soccer tonight, Friday at Pitt, 7 o'clock on ACC Network Extra. By the way, this is another one of those weekends where everybody is on the road. Women's soccer at NC State, Saturday, 7 on ACC Network. Field hockey at St. Joe's. That's going to be 1 o'clock in Philly. I forgot to write down what day it was. Forgive me, but that is this weekend. I think it was Saturday or Sunday. Volleyball at Florida State on Friday, 6:30 ACC Network, and then at Miami. So just spending the whole weekend in Florida, Sunday at 1. Those are both on ACC Network Extra. Several spring sports in action. Men's and women's tennis are competing in the ITA All-American Championships starting on Saturday and basically running for a week, so be ready for that. And then softball has a couple fall games, fall tune-ups that they are in action on Sunday as well. Well, friends, that does it for today's episode of Locked On Tar Heels, and obviously that does it for this weekend, this whole week of Locked On Tar Heels. I hope that you all have a great weekend, but want to remind you, you can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Heels. Follow me at Isaac Shade. You can email the show for more conversations, lockedontarheels@gmail.com. Again, would love for you to join the Discord. Come be in conversation with us. Don't forget to subscribe on audio or video formats. Smash the like button, and we'd love to hear your comments on today's show. It's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. We'll talk again on Monday, but until then, peace.